Hello everybody and welcome back. Today we're at the immigration desk at the Prefecture of Bologna. I'm here with our friend Adam. Last session he showed us how much he knows about Italy and its institutions. Hello again, Adam.
It's a pleasure to see you again, Karen, and hello to everybody out there.
In today's episode we're going to speak about how to enter Italy and what you will need when coming here for the first time, including the regulations and necessary documentation. And in conclusion, we will look at the penalties and consequences of violating the regulations which govern immigration, as well as some other Italian laws. As I'm sure Adam will tell you, immigration is a highly debated issue in Italy, and the relative legislation is extremely strict, especially where the consequences are concerned.
Unfortunately, that's how it is, even if it is common in all Western countries as well as others.
That's true. Okay, Adam, let's begin today by asking for your help once more. Where do we find ourselves today, and what role does the prefecture have in Italy?
The prefecture is an office of the Ministry of the Interior at a provincial level. In practice, it's the local branch of the Italian government in Rome and is led by a prefect. In the prefecture, you can find the immigration desk where most foreign immigrants begin their stay.
What's an immigration desk?
It's an office located in every prefecture, responsible for all the paperwork relative to the legal arrival of foreigners in Italy. Permits, initial employment, family reunification, and the conversion of a residence permit.
So, is the prefecture a branch of the Ministry of Interior?
Exactly. It deals with administrative matters, those related to the request for a residence permit, or those connected to the violation of any laws are handled by the Questura, the police headquarters, another body present at a provincial level, which is also responsible for accepting any declarations of the presence of foreigners in Italy.
Another complicated word. So, let's explain the Questura, as in Italian law.
The Questura is an office of the state police at a provincial level, and its task is to maintain public order and security on the territory, the province, or wherever it is. It acts under the command of the police commissioner, a police officer operating under the directives of the Ministry of the Interior.
We've spoken about the state police. However, I know that in Italy a second force of public security exists called the Carabinieri Corps. We don't have a similar distinction like that in England or the United States. Could you quickly explain the differences between these two police bodies?
Well, actually there are others too. For example, there is also the Guardia di Finanza, a sort of inland revenue tax police. It has the job of enforcing the rules related to taxes and economic accounting. But going back to the police and the Carabinieri, the main difference is that the Carabinieri are a division of the Italian armed forces operating as military police. They are in fact under the authority of the Ministry of Defense. The state police was demilitarized in 1981 and is under the authority of the Ministry of the Interior, as we said earlier. In practice, the difference is mainly in the territorial arrangement of command, since they very often perform the same jobs, as we'll later see. In the Questura, however, you will only deal with staff from the state police and administrative staff.
Let's start from the beginning. How can a foreign citizen enter Italy?
Under Italian law, there are 20 ways by which it is possible to request a visa to enter Italy. But the main four are tourism, study, family reunification, and work. Foreigners coming to Italy to visit relatives or for reasons of business, tourism, and study for periods not exceeding 3 months needn't request a residence permit. Possible visas: adoption, business, medical cure, diplomatic, accompanying family members, sporting events, invitation, self-employment, paid employment, religious mission, religious reasons, re-entry, choice of residence, family reunification, study, airport transit, transport, tourism, holiday work.
Visits, business, tourism, and study, no longer than 90 days.
You should remember that Italy, as a member of the European Union, has a different regulation for the access of foreigners coming from countries that are signatories to the Schengen Agreement.
Let's make this point clear as it's quite important. What is the Schengen Agreement?
The Schengen Agreement is a treaty initially signed in 1985 between most of the countries in the European Union. When it was first introduced into EU law by the Treaty of Amsterdam, it eliminated border controls and introduced a system of free movement to nationals coming from the signatory states, the other member states or third-party countries. Italy signed the agreement in 1990 and the new rules came into force in 1997.
You said most of the countries. The Schengen Agreement hasn't been signed by all members of the European, has it?
That's right. Great Britain and Ireland have not joined the Schengen Agreement, but there are also another 3 countries that are signatories but are not part of the European Union: Norway, Iceland and Switzerland.
What do these agreements provide regarding the arrival of foreign citizens in Italy?
They give a foreign citizen holding a residence permit of these countries or nationality thereof the right to be exempt from a visa for a stay not exceeding 3 months under the conditions that entry into Italy has been for motivation of paid employment, self-employment or apprenticeship.
So, is a visa only necessary for people from Schengen countries with a valid residence permit who are coming here for work or an apprenticeship?
Exactly. In any case, people should present themselves to the Questura within 8 days to report their presence on Italian soil.
If you go on holiday in Italy, you need only to report your presence. What's all that about?
Well, in itself, it's nothing but a document that substitutes the residence permit. If you're coming here for tourism from a Schengen area, the declaration of presence is represented by a receipt from the hotel where you are staying during your time in Italy, which has to be shown at the request of public forces, the police or the carabinieri.
But in many cases, foreigners coming to find relatives stay at their home. How would it work if a relative came to stay with me?
In this case, the declaration of presence will be down to you, i.e. the host. You will need to inform your nearest questura within 48 hours. They require your personal details and those of your guests, together with their passport details or identification documents, and the address where they are staying. All this together with photocopies of identification documents of the host and guests.
This procedure seems quite difficult. Isn't there a quicker way?
No, it isn't difficult at all, but a new way has recently been introduced. A foreigner can now declare their presence through a document downloadable from the internet, from the address on the screen. Remember that a fine for failing to communicate this information can be quite high.
Thanks a lot. I'll bear that in mind the next time I have guests coming to stay with me. But let's go back to the issue of visas, to people coming from the Schengen area with a legal residence permit. What happens if a foreigner wants to take a course here or is looking for work in Italy?
Well, in both cases, the visa is obligatory. In the first case, because it gives you an extended period of stay longer than 90 days. In the second case, because it is an employment transfer, whether paid or self-employed. These two situations are similar to those relating to foreign nationals coming from countries outside the Schengen area.
In fact, I remember that 10 years ago, when I came to study here in Italy, I had to request a visa for study purposes too.
Well, Karen, you came here legally, but I know many people who in recent years have come to Italy without the right documents, looking for a future. And they have lived here for quite some time as illegal immigrants, waiting for an amnesty, which is something they really shouldn't do.
I imagine it can't be easy. But what do you mean by amnesty?
Well, over the years, the Italian government has from time to time issued a decree that clears up problems coming from generalized laws held in force, like immigration control, for example. In many cases, the amnesty has granted permits of stay to many foreigners here illegally or whose permit has expired.
We'll have a chance later to talk about what it means to be irregular or illegal and what it involves further on. Your experience will be a great help if you don't mind talking about it.
No, of course I don't mind. That's why I'm here, after all.
Good. Well, then let's take a look at how to ask for a visa to Italy for non-Europeans.
In this case, an entrance visa on your passport is obligatory. You can get it from an Italian consulate or embassy in your home country. A tourist visa is enough if you want a short stay in Italy, 90 days maximum.
However, there are some non-Schengen countries that don't require a tourist visa.
Yes, some states in particular, such as the United States, Brazil, Argentina, Australia, and the Balkans don't require a visa for study purposes or for business if the period of stay is under 3 months. You should remember that you can't work or extend your stay with this type of visa, except in some very special cases, which we don't have time to go into here.
No, we'll have time later. Here are the papers you need to present to an Italian diplomatic representative in your country of origin for a tourist visa.
Good. I'd like to add that you don't need to report your presence when you have a visa, as the border control stamp is enough.
Remember, Adam, that all this information regarding visas is available on the website of the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
That's right.
But how should I go about getting a visa for longer than 90 days?
Well, it depends on the reasons why you're originally asking for a visa. In whichever case, once you are in Italy, you need to go to the Questura within 8 days to apply for your residence permit, which must have the same motivations for stay as in your entrance visa.
We said earlier that the visa request must be made from your country of origin, and that there are 4 main reasons for asking for a visa. Let's take this moment to repeat them. Can you remember them all?
Well, other than tourist visa and a study visa, there is also a visa for family reunification and one for work.
I know all about study visas. Do you mind if I explain it?
Absolutely not. You can see the information about it in the next image.
Study visas have to be requested at an Italian embassy in the country of residence. In my case, I went to the embassy. This visa is valid for the length of the course that you intend to study, which can be renewed every year until the end of the course.
Exactly. Remember that you can only work part-time with this type of visa, with a work contract that isn't more than 20 hours a week.
That's true. Now, let's take a look at the third type of visa. What do you mean exactly about a visa of family reunification?
Well, it means that the visa is obtained through reunification with their immediate family, a child, parent, or spouse.
Who can ask for this type of visa?
Any immediate family can request this visa for a stay of at least 1 year for a foreigner who is lawfully resident or is holding a residence permit, or for asylum or religious reasons.
The visas for asylum or religious reasons are special cases probably best dealt with another time, if that's okay with you.
You're probably right, especially since they are subject to certain regulations.
Okay, so let's go back to the reunification visa. How do you go about getting one?
This issue concerns me personally, as this is the way my wife came to Italy many years ago. This is the procedure. The foreign national living in Italy with a valid residence permit must apply for a no objection, or nulla osta, certificate for reunification with relatives via the internet. This document will then have to be presented along with the visa application forms at an Italian embassy in their home country.
Please explain exactly what we need to get this nulla osta document.
If you're an Italian citizen or you are a legal resident in Italy, you can download the forms via the internet on the website. For the correct procedure and the forms for proof of income and housing.
I see. And so, through this electronic procedure, your application will be forwarded to the right immigration desk.
Yes, so once they have received the request, they will arrange an appointment to validate your housing and income. In the first case, the certificate verifies that your housing is in compliance with local health standards. In the second case, which is more difficult, you prove that you have an annual income from legitimate sources, no less than the annual social benefits, increased by half that sum for every relative you are applying for, which further increases for every child under 14 years of age.
Are family members who have already been brought to Italy for reunification included in this calculation?
Yes, according to the current law, Article 29, paragraph 3 of the Decree on Immigration, you will need to include the annual total income of the family members living with the applicant. This way, if the applicant has no income, they can submit the appropriate papers demonstrating the income of family members living with them.
If this meets the requirement, the visa is granted, and the family member can come to Italy. Good. This all seems very clear to me. Let's look at the last case now. In some ways, the most important of all, the application for a work visa in Italy.
Yes, this type of request is without a doubt the most common, but even here we have to identify 2 different types of visas. One for employees and one for the self-employed. In the first case, the visa is tied to the request on behalf of an Italian employer who intends to use the immigration quota.
This isn't the first time we've heard this mentioned. Could you briefly describe just what this quota is?
Well, the immigration quota is a law updated annually by which the Italian government sanctions how many foreign nationals can annually enter Italy for reasons of work, divided by country of origin.
How does this law affect getting a work visa?
The fact is that once the available quota for each country has been used up, you can no longer apply for an employment visa. Therefore, you need to be committed and lucky enough too, because the applications are always higher than those available.
We can look at this on the image. To get an employment visa, an Italian employer has to make an application for a no-objection certificate at the immigration desk of the prefecture where the work will take place. Such authorization can then be presented to an Italian embassy of their home country, along with the necessary papers for a visa application.
That's right. Once in Italy, a foreign national who has entered on a work visa has 8 days to request a residence permit, citing the same reasons. However, different rules apply to some specific types of employment. Foreign workers living abroad carrying out highly qualified work can be hired in Italy outside the quotas set annually. For example, there are no specific entry quotas to hire managers or highly specialized staff from international companies, university professors, nurses, and workers in the field of entertainment, etc. These foreign workers are required to carry out the work expected of them without the possibility of converting their residence permit.
Yes, but before we tackle that, let's look at the second type of work visa, the self-employment visa.
Well, let's start off by saying that self-employment means any industrial, professional, artisanal, and commercial activity, including the creation of limited liability companies or persons or the hiring of corporate positions. To get this visa, you need to apply to the Italian consulate or embassy, along with proof of finance for such business.
How long does such a visa take?
This type of visa has to be issued or denied within 120 days of the application date. Remember that it has to be used within 180 days, otherwise it will be cancelled.
6 months.
The motivation of self-employment will appear on the visa issued by the consulate or embassy, showing the business you intend to perform.
Thanks, Adam. That was very useful and interesting. Let's take a look at this last image. What is meant by adequate financial resources to manage your own business? Does a chart exist, or is it decided on an individual basis?
Well, how much you need depends on what type of work you have in mind. If registration with a professional board is required, as for lawyers, psychologists, and surveyors, the financial resources is valued against the respective professional bodies. Otherwise, it is issued by the Chamber of Commerce of the territory where you wish to open your business.
Is the Chamber of Commerce a public body?
Yes, it is. It's a body embracing all the different types of business of the territory which it deals with.
Well, I think that's about everything regarding visas. Let's move on to something even more important, an application for a residence permit. We mentioned earlier that any foreigner wishing to stay in Italian territory for longer than 90 days has to register their arrival in Italy and apply for a residence permit at the immigration desk located in the prefecture.
Exactly. People arriving in Italy for the first time have 8 days in which to apply for a residence permit.
8 days is quite a short time, so we're lucky to have Adam here with us to explain how to apply for a residence permit in Italy.
Well, I hope I'm clear enough. Let's start off by saying that the residence permit is a key document as it attests to the legality of stay of a foreign national in Italy. You could say that it's your first Italian identity card.
Even a temporary residence permit, as we said in the first episode, can be considered one more step in overcoming the feeling of being foreign in a foreign country.
Tell me about it. With a residence permit, I could finally bring my family to this country, get a job with a signed contract, rent a flat, and have a residence in Italy.
That's just what I meant. One way to start calling this country home is what we're learning about. So, we've arrived in Italy with our visa. At this point, we have to go to the immigration desk within 8 days. What do I need to show for this application?
Several documents are necessary. I've shown them here on this chart. Documents for the residence permit application. Application form. Passport or other equivalent valid travel documents with the relative entrance visa if required. A photocopy of the same document. 4 recent and identical passport photos. A tax stamp of €14.62, the documentation necessary for the type of residence permit requested.
But doesn't it all depend on the different reasons for coming to Italy?
Exactly. There are specific procedures depending on the motivations indicated on the visa, which will be shown on your residence permit. We should look at each case individually.
I agree. We'll look at those later. What does electronic payment mean?
It's nothing but a revenue stamp, a tax, which can be purchased in any tobacco shop.
Are there any other added taxes?
Actually, yes. If you apply for a residence permit longer than 90 days, you will have to pay €27.50 by a bank transfer from a post office account. You can find the bank transfer at the friend counter of any post office. You will also need to pay €30 to the post office when you deliver your completed application.
Where do you have to deliver this documentation and the payment receipts?
The documentation has to be submitted to the friend counter at the post office SPA of the place where you reside in Italy. The post office will handle the delivery of these documents to the correct questura.
Okay, that's clear. What happens once you arrive at the immigration desk?
They will check all the data about the foreign national, and you will be assigned a tax code, a code that identifies each citizen and resident for tax purposes, and which is an integral part of the new Italian identity. At that point, you sign the contract of stay, which defines the details of your stay in Italy. The integration agreement, as it is well known, was introduced in 2009, where the foreign nationals has to stipulate a stay of not less than 1 year when they apply for their residence permit. This agreement commits the foreigner to achieving their targets within 2 years, enough time to learn the values of liberty, equality and democracy that form the basis of the Constitution. Just what we're trying to explain. Then they will be required to learn Italian and ensure that they carry out their duty of educating their children. The Italian state will support them along this path of integration, making available the public structure of education which provides special courses in Italian. All foreigners over 16 will have to sign the integration agreement. Parents sign for children between 16 and 18 years of age. Anyone applying for a residence permit for less than a year, or those with severe health problems or language or cultural learning difficulties, should not sign the agreement. To satisfy the agreement, the foreign citizen must obtain at least 30 credits within 2 years. 16 credits are automatically awarded at the time of signature. The others are obtained by acquiring certain knowledge, such as knowledge of Italian or getting study qualifications registration with the National Health Service, or by signing a lease or purchasing a home. The credits are removed if you commit serious violations of law or commit a crime.
Is this when we receive the form itself?
Yes, once all these procedures have been carried out, you will receive the form to fill in. It doesn't ask for much information, name, surname, residency, which we'll speak about soon enough. But even at this point, you can get help from agencies authorized to help fill in such forms.
That's very clear. What do you need to do once you've filled in your application?
Well, at this point, the person applying for a residence permit has to go to a post office and send the application form in the attached envelope. You will be supplied with a kit for your application.
What's included in this kit?
It includes the necessary forms to begin the procedure, as well as a password and username to access the website and manage your application electronically through the portal. You go to www.portaleimmigrazione.it, where you can follow development of your paperwork at any moment.
So, do you need to have an internet connection?
Almost all procedures regarding immigration and permits of stay are carried out electronically via the internet and using a PC. That's why I repeat my advice of getting help from a trade union or welfare agency. The most difficult things are often the most practical, such as not having a computer or an internet connection.
That's definitely a good idea to keep in mind. Not to mention the difficulty of dealing with forms often written in an unknown language.
That's right. Asking for help is often necessary. That's why we're here, after all.
All that's left now is the most boring part of the procedure.
Yes, I suppose so. When you hand in your application, the post office will inform you of the date for your appointment to have your fingerprints taken, which will be forwarded to the questura. Unfortunately, this procedure is obligatory. The same questura will then let you know about the delivery of your residence permit.
Questura. Right. We finished describing a general outline of the procedure. What should we do while we're waiting for the residence permit?
Well, the first thing is to make sure you go to the registry office to register your residency in the council where you live.
Basically, it's a declaration of where I live, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Having a residency can significantly affect your life as an immigrant in Italy.
You told us earlier that you don't have to have a residency document to get the residence permit, didn't you?
Actually, your residency doesn't affect the validity of your status in Italy, which is proven by your possession of a residence permit, whether valid or in renewal. It only documents the continued presence of an immigrant citizen in the territory and eases access to important civil rights, both social and economical.
That's really important, isn't it? Shall we take a look at some of these rights?
Why not? Let's take a look at this image. Social welfare and health services, taxation and household services.
3 basic rights.
Undoubtedly, not to mention that residency is strictly necessary for those who request a residence permit for self-employment, such as a craftsman, for example, a builder, electrician, or baker.
Your residency, as much as I have understood, also affects some of your rights in the long term.
Yes, it does. For example, a continued residency in Italy for at least 10 years is one of the requirements to apply for citizenship. Your residency is also necessary to open a bank account or to get a loan.
It seems that having a residency is almost as important as having a residence permit. But after all, I believe it's a way to assert your place in this country.
I was just about to say that. I recommend that everyone applies for residency at your local council as soon as possible, even if your residence permit hasn't been issued yet, provided the request is made within 8 days of your arrival.
That's worth repeating, in fact. Earlier, we described the generic procedure regarding the first issue of a residence permit. If you agree, I'd like to take a deeper look now, case by case, at least regarding the most common reasons.
Okay, that's a good idea. It's always better to be more specific.
Let's start with the paperwork necessary for workers.
In this case, the paperwork you have to present to the immigration desk is made up of the following. 1 tax stamp of €14.62, a photocopy of all the pages in your passport, the entrance visa you were issued with by the Italian consulate or embassy, your application for the place of lodging certificate listed as the worker's address, a statement from your host of where you are living, and a copy of the tax code issued at the immigration desk.
Besides these, the only other paperwork to present is the no objection document issued to the employer. How long can a work residence permit last?
At most 2 years, after which the permission has to be renewed.
And as for self-employment?
Well, this type of application is strictly linked to the immigration quota for each professional category, which also requires the most paperwork of all.
Well then, let's take a deeper look into it.
Okay, the first document is the Certificate of Adequate Resources for Self-Employment. The application must be accompanied by the according documents depending on the type of self-employment you're applying for.
Is the Certificate of Economic Resources done by the same body as the visa?
It's in an office called the Provincial Directorate of Labour, which checks the quota for self-employment and reports it to the immigration desk. If the quota is full or you don't have the necessary requirements, the immigration desk will inform the foreign national. On the positive side, the immigration desk will call the foreign national to give them the certificate that he has met the prescribed requirements. Then the immigration desk will have you sign the application for a self-employed residence permit, and the procedure moves ahead as we saw earlier.
Thanks, Adam. That was very clear. Do you have anything to add regarding the self-employed residence permit?
Yes. Depending on your type of work, you might need to register with a professional board. You'll need to have the certificate we just spoke about and possess an annual income higher than the minimum level for the exemption to healthcare costs, €8,500.
8,500. All that's left now is to look at the way to apply for a residence permit for reunification once the family member has arrived in Italy. Let's begin by repeating quickly the degrees of kinship of family members. Who can apply for this visa?
You can apply for family members under these conditions: spouses who are not legally separated and whose age is over 18, your or your spouse's children or born out of wedlock and are married under the condition that the other parent, if alive, has given their consent. Adult dependent children who cannot take care of their own needs and necessities relating to their state of health, which entails total disability. Dependent parents who have no children in their home country or birthplace, or parents over 75 years of age whose children are unable to support them for documented serious health reasons.
If you meet any of these conditions, the visa is granted and the family member can come to Italy. What should you do about applying for a residence permit once they've arrived?
Before anything else, you have to go to the immigration desk of the prefecture that issued the no objection certificate and ask them for an application form. The procedure from here on in is exactly the same as before. The family member newly arrived in Italy has to go to a post office where they will send an application for a residence permit issued from the immigration desk. As before, the procedure can be followed via the internet.
Regarding their residency, can you directly declare your host's home address?
Yes, you can, but in order to have the same residence address, the reunified family will have to deliver a copy of the no objection certificate granted to the family reunification visa application.
Thanks, Adam. Let's take a look at a special case now regarding minors. We'll briefly explain how the rights of foreign minors are guaranteed in Italy.
First of all, it must be said that foreign minors legally residing in Italy are registered in the residence permit or residence card of one or both parents until they are 14 years of age. So that even if they have entered Italy irregularly, foreign minors are entitled to all the rights guaranteed by the New York Convention of the Rights of Minors established in 1989.
Which official bodies ensure compliance with these rights in Italy?
The Committee for Foreign Minors at the Ministry of Social Solidarity. Italian law divides minors present in Italy into two groups, accompanied and unaccompanied, depending on whether or not the parents or legal guardians are legally recognized in Italy.
Which rights are provided for in both of these two categories?
Well, both categories protect some basic rights such as education and healthcare. With regard to unaccompanied minors, there are extra additional prerogatives, protection and assistance, such as providing food and accommodation, the guarantee of not being deported, a residence permit, and the chance to request asylum should they require it.
It's important to know that these rights are protected in Italy. But what happens to minors who are no longer minors, by which I mean when they turn 18 years of age?
The possibility for a minor to remain in Italy with a legal residence permit after having turned 18 years of age depends on what type of residence permit they have when they were a minor, foster care or family reasons, plus a series of other conditions. They can then request that their residence permit as a minor be converted to a residence permit for reasons of study, work or political asylum.
At this point, we have all the information regarding the issuing of permits of stay. How can we summarize the importance of this document?
Well, the residence permit is the main document that certifies the legality of your presence in Italy. This is why it has to be shown at the request of the public security forces. The failure to present such document without good reasons may result in heavy penalties, fines, or even a conviction.
So remember to always carry yours with you during your stay.
Absolutely. Besides, whenever you visit a public office to ask for a registration, license, or other measures of personal interest, you are obliged to show your residence permit, either valid or awaiting renewal.
Are there any exceptions where you don't have to show your residence permit?
Yes, when it has to do with your inalienable rights, such as a request for health care, the birth of the child, or their school enrollment. In these cases, the civil servant shouldn't ask you to show your residence permit, nor report any irregularities. The only cases when they are forced to do so are when the medical staff are obliged to transmit a medical report to the police for trauma and injuries from accidents, fights, and so on.
Also, remember that the residence permit includes limitations, depending on the reasons why it was issued. For example, you cannot work full-time with a study residence permit.
Actually, only the work or family member residence permit allows you to carry out all the permitted activities with unlimited renewals, so long as you continue to fulfill the issue requirements. Not all permits are renewable, some have a limited amount of renewals and others are not convertible. To avoid any complications regarding the issue of your residence permit, I again recommend you consult a trade union or welfare agency to clearly understand your rights and the laws that govern your stay in Italy.
Now all that's left is to explain how to renew and convert the visas we spoke about.
The procedure is much as the same as your initial application, only you have to remember to present a copy of the expired residence permit. The post office will send you a renewal application form along with the kit.
Is that the same kit we spoke about?
Yeah, that's right. A renewal normally requires you to have some accommodation, a job, and a minimum salary if you're an employee.
What about a renewal for reunification?
In the case of a family member dependent upon another citizen legally residing here, you only need a document proving your home address.
At which point you will be called to visit the immigration desk at the prefecture. Okay, let's take a look at the conversion of a residence permit.
Remember that now all permits of stay can be converted. Some conversions, such as a work or study permit, follow the procedures we described for the initial application.
So you'll have to forward your application to the immigration desk in this case, too, and wait to be called to sign the contract of stay and the granting of the permit.
Getting help from a welfare agency or an official body, you'll be able to evaluate all the different opportunities for the renewal or conversion of your residence permit. The different ways are explained on the Italian Foreign Ministry website.
Are there any other opportunities for people who have stayed in Italy for a certain period of time?
With 5 years of legal residence in Italy, you can ask for a card of stay, which is actually called a CE long-term residence permit, for you or your family members. This document gives you an unlimited residence permit and therefore represents an important possibility.
5 years, very interesting. What are the necessary requirements in this case?
Well, there are two in particular. You need to have your registration certificate that states your family relationship and status, obtained at the council offices, and adequate resources according to the size of your family, such as in the case of reunification. In this regard, it's possible to apply for a card of stay for your reunified family members in the same way. You'll also have to pass an Italian language test, which is considered proof of your integration as a foreigner in Italy.
Is the exam difficult?
It's true that Italian isn't so easy to learn, but 5 years is enough to pick it up.
Well, how do I go about getting this card?
The procedure is identical to the renewal. You make the application and fill in the kit at the post office, as well as attaching the documents shown here on the screen.
Okay, and how much time need pass before you can apply for Italian citizenship?
Citizenship is generally granted to foreigners resident in Italy for at least 10 years who have not committed any crimes in that time, but there are some circumstances that shorten or lengthen this time. The important thing is that children born in Italy whose parents are both foreign do not automatically acquire citizenship. They only get it if they have legally resided in Italy without interruption until they have turned 18 years of age, and then declare their desire to acquire Italian citizenship from their local council before they are 19 years old. Anyone who marries an Italian can apply for citizenship after 2 years of residence in Italy or after 3 years of residence abroad if the bond of marriage continues until citizenship has been granted. These terms are reduced by half if the couple has had children together. Minors of people who have acquired Italian citizenship and live with them are also Italian citizens. Once you are notified that you have been granted citizenship, you have to take an oath of allegiance to the Italian Republic at your local council or at the diplomatic consular authorities abroad. The day after, you become an Italian citizen.
We'll look into that later. Here we come to the most difficult issue. According to Italian laws, and in particular the Consolidated Law on Immigration, if you are found to be on Italian soil without a valid residence permit, you are in violation of the law and are liable to serious consequences.
Such as when you don't have a residence permit or your permit has expired, for example, when you have lost your job.
Can you explain what irregular means in Italy?
Yes, I can, as well as what illegal means. The way I came to Italy would be considered illegal as much as anyone in Italy without a legal residence permit. Irregulars are people who have remained in Italy even after their visa or residence permit has expired. For example, they had a residence permit, but they no longer have the necessary requirements for its renewal, such as having a job.
What penalties and risks does this status entail?
All foreigners without a residence permit, valid, expired or non-existent, shall be expelled if they come from countries not on Italy's border, or they will be accompanied to the border of neighbouring countries. However, there are certain circumstances that prevent expulsion.
Can you list them?
In first place is illegal or irregular citizens who can't be immediately expelled should they need aid or their travel documents are not ready in time for the journey, or if a suitable means are not available. Furthermore, citizens whose identity or nationality is not known cannot be repatriated, further to public safety measures by the police commissioner and validated by a magistrate.
What happens to people stopped in this case?
Foreigners whose identity is unknown are held in Identification and Expulsion Centres, CIE.
What are these centers?
Physically, these are facilities where foreigners are held pending deportation. They were first introduced in 1998 by Law 40 as Detention Facilities, CFP, and later modified in 2008 by Law 125 when it took its current name.
How long can foreign nationals be detained in these centers before their deportation?
According to law, they should remain in such places for as long as it takes to identify and prepare their deportation. Unfortunately, this can take up to 6 months.
The hope is that Italian legislation tries its best to make it as short as possible. Seeing as we have begun to speak about the possible consequences of violating Italian laws, let's move on to the last part of this episode, which is all about the highway code and the rules governing driving in Italy, as well as the legislation on drugs.
Two of the most frequent reasons why foreigners incur penalties under Italian law.
Let's start with a practical matter. Many foreigners in Italy ask if they can use their own driving license that they were issued in their own country.
Foreign driving licenses can be used for a maximum of 1 year in Italy, except for citizens of the European Union. If this isn't the case, your driving license can be exchanged for an Italian one only if an agreement exists between Italy and your home country. Otherwise, you will have to become a resident in Italy and pass a driving test for a new license. Remember that if your Italian isn't up to it, you can always ask for an oral exam.
Driving in Italy is regulated by the Highway Code, which lists all the rules and obligations expected of a driver. Are there limitations for cars with a foreign license plate?
Yes, it can be used for a year, after which your car has to be registered in Italy and carry an Italian license plate.
Actually, a Croatian friend of mine who drives a car with a Croatian license plate told me that he was once stopped and threatened with a fine for not having registered his car in Italy.
Yes, the problem is that any failure to respect the highway code may result in rather serious administrative and criminal consequences.
Let's get a little more specific. What does the violation of these rules imply?
The standard form is an administrative penalty presented by a police officer, which normally carries with it a fine. If you have received a fine, you have two options. You can pay it at a post office, or you can appeal it.
What do you mean by appeal?
An appeal is a written document with which the owner or driver of a vehicle charged with a violation of the highway code can clarify the reasons why they consider the penalty unjust or wrong. They should present it to the prefect or a justice of the peace in the place where they were fined.
Your appeal may be upheld or not. Let's look at each case. What happens in the case of an appeal to the prefect?
When an appeal is not upheld, the prefect can double the fine. Otherwise, your violation can be annulled. When making an appeal, you should wait for the prefect's decision before paying your fine.
Within what amount of time can you make an appeal to the prefect?
Well, the driver or owner may make an appeal within 70 days. The prefect must judge the appeal within 120 days after receiving the appeal. If no judgment is made, the fine is automatically cancelled. In any case, the decision has to be communicated within 150 days of the appeal.
Is it possible to challenge the prefect's decision?
Yes, it's possible to appeal to the justice of the peace to contest the judgment, but a negative verdict brings with it a much higher fine.
So it's better to think about it carefully and consult an expert.
Regarding a justice of the peace, the length of time is the same, but the appeal has to contain a declaration of residency in the territory where the justice of the peace operates. But I should point out that you will be opening a real lawsuit.
How does the procedure end before the justice of the peace?
Well, the judge may grant the appeal, cancelling or reducing the fine, or reject the appeal, forcing you to pay the full amount plus any surcharges, including the cost of the lawyer of your counterpart.
So take care in this case too. Now, let's imagine that you don't pay the fine and the extra charges. What will happen?
Well, in this case, the public administration has the right to forcibly collect the fines and may assign the task to a third party.
Will they deal with all the paperwork too?
They will notify the interested party by a document called a recovery notice, which asks for the amount owed plus interest, and warn you of the penalties for non-payment. You can make an appeal against a recovery notice in this case too.
Where should you present an appeal in such a case?
It depends on the amount of the penalty. For figures less than €15,493.71, the appeal should be sent to the Justice of the Peace. Otherwise, it should be sent to the court with the right jurisdiction. Everything must be sent within 30 days of receiving the recovery notice.
Need you have a legal representative in this case?
Yes, for all cases before a court and those before a Justice of the Peace with an amount exceeding €516.46, except for specific derogations.
Right. Let's take a closer look at the Highway Code. First off, what are the main penalties?
Well, other than a fine, the penalty for violating the Highway Code can be of three types: revocation, withdrawal, and suspension. As we see in the image, your driving license can be revoked for lack of moral requirements or for serious convictions by a court as provided for in Articles 120, 218 and 224 of the Highway Code. In case of the revocation of your license, an appeal can be presented to a Regional Administrative Court of Law, TAR, with the help of a lawyer.
What about your license withdrawal?
Your license can be withdrawn if you are found driving with an expired license or you have been using a foreign driving license for more than a year. This last point would be of particular interest to our listeners.
To avoid these penalties, you should carry out your license's renewal or conversion within 12 months. Now for the suspension of your driving license.
A driving license can be suspended for violating the rules of road conduct, such as driving while intoxicated or under the influence of drugs, for injuries inflicted on others through an accident, and for reasons decided by a judge.
What happens with the paperwork in the first case when you violate the rules of road conduct?
The prefect of the locality receives the acts from the police or carabinieri who caught the offence and shall issue an order to suspend the driving license and indicate the period of suspension. This period is determined in relation to the gravity of the infringement, in relation to the minimum and maximum limits established by the CDS.
Over a 2-year period, is your driving license returned at the end of the suspension?
My advice is to always contact the prefecture to know how to get your license back. The driving license can be returned to the license holder themselves or a delegate by proxy in writing, along with a photocopy of a document showing the delegate's identity.
Can you appeal the withdrawal or suspension of a driving license?
Of course, you can appeal to the Justice of the Peace within 30 days or of being notified by the same method we spoke about earlier.
The second case involving a license suspension is due to serious personal injuries caused by an accident. What's the procedure in this case?
In case of bodily harm, the prefect will contact the appropriate office within the Ministry of Transport and may impose a suspension for up to 1 year. The appeal will then be forwarded to the Ministry within 20 days.
All that's left is a suspension given by a judge.
In this case, the prefect will suspend a driving license following a criminal sentence, even when it has nothing to do with driving, or in response to a criminal investigation or a conviction. To appeal, you can appear before the Justice of the Peace of the place where the violation was committed in Article 205 CDS.
That's everything regarding your driving license. However, there are some violations which involve the seizure of your vehicle.
Yes, the seizure of the vehicle may be due to not having any insurance, RC, and or vehicle registration. You can't drive in Italy without them. If your vehicle has been seized, you can make an appeal to the prefect within 60 days following the notification of your infringement. The prefect shall decide within 90 days after completing his investigation. If your infringement is closed, your vehicle will be released immediately. A further appeal against the prefect's rejection of appeal can be made to the Justice of the Peace within 30 days of being notified of the prefect's verdict.
So how do you go about getting your vehicle back afterwards?
The release from seizure of your vehicle due to lacking any insurance must be requested from the body that ordered its seizure. However, you must have paid the imposed fine beforehand and already hold an insurance policy that covers you for at least 6 months. If you decided that your vehicle isn't worth recovering, you always have the option to scrap it at your own expense.
Scrap it. At what cost?
Well, you can avoid paying the insurance, but you will have to pay a deposit for the detention of the vehicle by the public authority, 3/4 of which will be returned to you once it has been scrapped. But if you or a relative have a suitable place where you can keep it while awaiting its demolition, which is not a parking space in a public passage, you can avoid paying for this as well.
When do the fines have to be paid by?
Fines must be paid within 60 days after notification, should you not wish to appeal. You can request payment by installments from the prefect, but you will have to produce documents demonstrating your financial difficulties.
Thanks a lot, Adam. So, the last part of this episode is dedicated to the legislation and penalties regarding the use and possession of drugs, which we should all be made aware of.
That's right, especially since it's the cause of most convictions. The law on drugs is regulated by the Consolidated Drugs Act of 1990, modified in 2006, which distinguishes between drugs held primarily for personal use or for dealing.
If you don't mind, we'll only cover the possession of drugs for personal use in this episode. How are the two cases distinguished?
The distinction isn't immediate. According to this law, personal use is determined by the amount of active ingredients in the drug seized, which is analyzed as soon as it has been sequestered. If the result is inferior to the minimum quantity included in the Ministry's chart, then the crime will be pursued through administrative channels only, which means through the prefect.
What happens exactly?
The prefect can apply one or more administrative penalties, fines, or withdraw your driving license or expatriation documents. You can still present a written brief to the prefect within 30 days after the contestation date or the infringement violation date.
What are the possible consequences?
First of all, the interested party will be called on to go to the Core Operating Unit for Drug Addition, NOT, of the Prefecture, UTG, for a meeting which will take place with the help of the professional experience of a social worker.
What if this concerns a minor?
In this case, the parents of the minor are invited to the meeting so as to inform them about the public and private facilities that can help give them information and advice.
What's the meeting all about?
The meeting is to understand what caused the violation and identify further actions or prevention, rehabilitation and recovery.
I understand. And what consequences may result from the administrative procedure?
The administrative procedure may develop in different ways. If this is a first offence, the prefect may decide to terminate proceedings with a formal request not to use drugs in lieu of penalties.
What if it isn't a first offence?
Well, during the interview, the offender will be punished and sent to a drug rehab clinic, a CERT, to carry out a treatment program of social rehabilitation.
What happens to the user in these treatment programs?
The program provides the periodic monitoring of urinary catabolites, psychological interviews, pharmacological interventions if necessary, and in especially serious cases, their inclusion in a therapeutic community. The success of the treatment program will be regularly reviewed by NOT with the staff of CERT. Once the program has concluded and been communicated, the administrative procedure can be closed.
Let's clearly explain the consequences for people who don't turn up for their interview or who refuse to carry out these programs.
If the offender does not attend the meeting or refuses to follow the therapeutical program or interrupts it without good reason, certain penalties will be applied as stated in Article 75 of the DPR 309 of 1990, which carries with it a suspension of 1 to 36 months of your driving license, identity card for expatriation, passport, and a maximum suspension of 12 months of the firearms permit. The CERT-A will be informed in all cases where the NOA is aware of drug use, as stated in Article 121 of the same decree.
In short, the consequences can be quite serious.
Yes, it basically means an admission of guilt. But in the event of penalties issued by the prefect, as well as the loss of the documents that we saw earlier, you can also add the suspension of the residence permit for tourist reasons, or be forbidden from getting one if you are a non-EU citizen. Clearly, this is a worst-case scenario for us new Italians.
You risk losing your residence permit too. Therefore, we remind everyone to take the utmost care when driving and of anything to do with drugs.
Yes, and remember that the cases we mentioned today were among the lightest offences. When an offence is criminal or carries with it particularly heavy penalties, you risk losing your right of stay in this country and you will be expatriated. This is the last thing we want.
That's right. And we will discover how respecting the laws and regulations will promote a greater acceptance of foreigners by Italian citizens, as we mentioned in the previous episode.
Indeed. And I hope that by talking about the most difficult situations can help us to play it safe and enjoy our stay here.
We've come to the end of our second episode. Today we've dealt with the procedures for entry into Italy, the visa application and residence permit, laws and the highway code, as well as the consequences for the most common violations. In our next episode, we will open a fundamental chapter on the way to work in Italy and the laws that govern it. We will also explain how pensions and social care works. Are you ready, Adam?
Of course, it'll be as interesting as today was.
Thank you, and I'll see you and you.
See you next time.